Hello, how are you? I'm Laura Shoemaker. You may be wondering, what is this Autism Technology, and a picture of my son doing the thing. That's my son Matthew, and that is his Facebook profile. So I wanted to say a few words of thanks first to Steve, who did just a great job of putting this wonderful thing together, and just to the People with Disabilities Foundation. It's just a real honor to be here speaking to you today. Matthew is 26 years old. He lives in Santa Cruz, and he calls me just about every morning. This morning he called to report that he'd had a nightmare, and he kind of went through the details of the nightmare. And afterwards I said, Matthew, I'm just so sorry. And he said, sorry doesn't cut it. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention about Matthew is, he has autism. When we fly anywhere, he needs to go on the airplane first. He just needs it for his spatial whole feeling safe in a space without a lot of people crowded around. So a few months ago, we traveled together, and we were in a real hurry. We ran up to the Southwest counter, and I said, my son's disabled. We need an early boarding pass. And Matthew looked so crushed. And after we got the pass, he looked at me and said, Mom, I'm not disabled. I have autism. And I really felt for him, because there is a lot of talk about cure, but I think a lot of individuals with autism feel like, hey, this is who I am. I am funny, I am smart, I am, I have my own particular interests, but I'm not disabled, I have autism. So I just wanted to throw that out because it's something that's very important to my son. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Oh, I need a clicker. Come on, click. There we go. There I am. Laura Shoemaker. Who am I? I grew up near here in Piedmont, California. I was just one of those really lucky people who had great parents, happy family. There was never a time where I didn't know that I wanted to be a mother. So this is not my baby. It's my brother's baby. And this is a picture I used to show to all of my prospective boyfriends, which my mother said was not a really good idea. She said, Laura, when you show them that you're so into being a mother, it kind of scares them away. And it did. But eventually I met my husband, Peter. We were married almost 28 years tomorrow. So there we are. As you can see from the photo, my side of the family, we're totally normal. We're the normal ones. Matthew got the autism from my husband's side of the family. They're the quirky ones. We're fine. But anyway, after we decided that what we're going to do is, okay, after 2 years of marriage, we'll have our first baby. Matthew beat us by 2 months, and that picture of me with Matthew and my husband that is the happiest day of my life, and there will never be a day like that. It was just incredible. So 2 years later, we decided to have another baby. We had another son. And then after a few years, we thought maybe it was time to try for a girl. You can see how that turned out. But so I have 3 terrific sons, and I'm very, very lucky. But this is Matthew at age 2, when we began to notice this development was exactly what we had imagined. He was losing words. He had fixations on the sprinklers, and he was lining up his toys. And it was the first time we had to face what was ahead of us, that he had a developmental disability. We didn't know what it was yet, but it was eventually diagnosed with autism. This is way back when, before anybody was diagnosing people with autism. I mean, even though we knew at age 2 that there was something up, he wasn't formally diagnosed until he was 5. So one of the things he really loved to do was get a rise out of his 2 younger brothers. It was it caused him great excitement to make them angry. So if one of them would bump their head by mistake, he would run over and hit the other one on the head, and everyone would be crying. It'd be so exciting. So that was kind of Matthew's big thing at the time. He's since gotten over that, luckily. But there was always a feeling when we were raising Matthew that we needed to do something for him. We felt like, okay, well, he's not learning enough in school. His IEP goals were always the same, get him to learn to read, get him to learn to interact, get him to behave well at recess. But you can see how tuned in he is with the teacher's aid that we got for him, really tuned in. But the thing that we were missing was that Matthew may have had some difficulties being Matthew, but he was very capable. He was really good. After school, he would build the most incredible Lego buildings and towns, and he would paint really beautiful watercolors. He really had an artistic sense, but then, of course, I'd have to pluck him up and put him in the car and drive him to therapy, So I just want to say a word about the incredible capability of so many people on the autism spectrum. And it's something that I'm learning more and more about as my son gets older. And it's true that while there's no cure, there is treatment, and with maturity, it gets better. This has just been my experience with Matthew. So, okay, this is the age where I decided that Matthew had no interest in technology. I decided he really needed to learn some computer skills, so we put that into his IEP, and we were really, very forceful about it. But it was also a stage in his life where he communicated his frustration very aggressively. And this is not exactly what happened, because believe me, at the time I didn't take a picture. I was a little more upset, but Matthew, computers frustrated the heck out of him. And it wasn't until very recently that changed. And so this is kind of a late-breaking news type of story that I'm telling you. This is Matthew today. He's 26 years old, as I said, lives in a community in Santa Cruz area called Camp Hill Communities, California. And there he lives in a community of other people with disabilities. And it is his goal to become a gardener or a landscaper, but he also has some intense interests. One of them is singing karaoke. He's really into it. He's really into Roy Orbison and the difference between his version of Pretty Woman and that of David Lee Roth and Van Halen. And I'm quite intense, and so we... But what was interesting is I said, great, Matthew, let's get on the computer and look at Roy Orbison's version and Van Halen's version. He said, Mom, you do it, I'll watch. I get very angry at computers. So I've spent a lot of time when he's home from his program, going to this YouTube and that YouTube, and also helping him create a Facebook profile. But he didn't want any. He wanted to get friends on Facebook. He wanted to interact, but he did not want to touch that computer because it made him very angry. I want to point out that I have a blog on SFGate, so there's a lot of information about autism, not only about information about autism, but about what it's like to have autism. I have a lot of self-advocates who are writing blogs these days. I think it's really important to hear their perspective. I also have my website, lauraschumaker.com. And then there's one more website I really encourage you to check out, and it's the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. This is a website and a book that was put together by some local women, and I think you'll find it very helpful if you want to learn more about autism, about services, and where to go for information. So thank you so much for having me.
So these are the areas that I'm going to cover. I briefly will go over the employment situation, the employment market for people on the spectrum, and then talk about what we do at the Specialist Guild, and finally cover what are the challenges in this approach. So a little bit of demographic data. Dr. Peterson already mentioned the figure of 1 in 88 being on the spectrum at this point. Put it into a different context, that's about 3.5 million people in the United States. So there's a lot of people that will be or are diagnosed with autism. Now, I knew I was going to get in trouble showing numbers and percentages because my number is different from yours, Dr. Peterson. But somewhere I read the number, or 60% of the individuals have actually normal IQ. Whether this number is right or not, my presentation is basically dealing with the people who are either called high functioning. These would be the Asperger's and the PPD-NOS people that would fall into this category. But even amongst the high functioning population, only about 20% have a job. And many of these people work for family businesses or friends, or not what I would call open market positions necessarily. So they are really being helped and assisted by family and the community at large. So the other problem with the people who do have jobs is that they tend to be underemployed. What I mean by that is that these jobs may be bagging groceries in it's Safeway, whereas the person may have the intellectual ability to do a much higher level work. And we often see, particularly amongst the older adults, that there is a history of fits and starts in the employment picture. People change careers a lot. These are all signs that things are not that easy for people on the spectrum. In my opinion, this is a great waste of talent, and also, in general, society has to somehow support these people, so it's an issue. And lastly but not least, these people, they have the intelligence to know that they are being sidelined. So this has a huge impact on their quality of life of both themselves and their families. So I'm just going to cover a few of the challenges that I typically see with people on the spectrum when they try to get a job. We already talked a little bit about the fact that typically they have awkward social skills. This tends to manifest itself in many different ways, but essentially they have trouble reading other people's intentions and body language. They don't pick up on the social cues that the rest of us do. So there is lots of room for misunderstanding. Also, most of them don't have a facility to interact with people that easily. They don't know when to break into a conversation, when to start speaking, when to stop speaking. So typically, in a work setting where there's an expectation to socialize, they don't do so well. A second aspect that often gets in the way is literalness. I call it literalness. This can both cause problems in the processing of language. So people often hear the words, but they don't necessarily hear the meaning that was being conveyed, particularly if people are trying to hint things. It doesn't get across. And then the other aspect of literalness is often people come out with blunt comments and offend people without intending to. So again, these can cause friction in the workplace and get in the way of either getting a job or staying employed. There are also, I guess, language pragmatic issues that tend to occur where people are trying to process, for instance, spoken instructions, and a lot of us tend to run on with these instructions. We tend to say, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, but the person on the spectrum is still trying to process the very first thing that you said. So they have lost track of where you are and really didn't hear the second part of your instructions. And also, people on the spectrum may have environmental sensitivities that can be being very sensitive to noise in the environment. There can be sensitivity to fluorescent lights, things that basically the neurotypical person doesn't find distracting, but the people on the spectrum might. And in today's work environment, we often see these open cubs, not even cubicles anymore. truly open concept now. So many of these distractions are actually quite serious. Okay, so in contrast, what do we see in the job market? What are companies looking for? What are the demands? One of the trends that I've observed is that whereas before we used to have very specialized job descriptions, you know, here's a bookkeeping, here's you know, a tester, and so forth and so on. Now what we see is a lot of companies are asking for people to be generalists rather than specialists. So they ask for a lot of diverse requirements. The way that might affect someone on the spectrum is that, for instance, you might apply for a job as a bookkeeper, but they tell you that when the secretary goes on their lunch period, you are required to man the phones and interact with clients, answer questions. That would be an extremely stressful thing to do for someone on the spectrum. There's also a lot of emphasis on having social skills, you know, teamwork, fitting in with the team. Not the easiest thing for someone with autism. Having to basically promote themselves. I put that down as my branding. You know, people, you read these stories where people today applying for a position, the companies check out your Facebook page. They want to know how often you tweet, whatever you call it. And these are behaviors that people on the spectrum don't often have in abundance. The work environment itself can be very high stress because of changing requirements, changing demands, an expectation of you being on call around the clock. And I'm particularly talking about the more high-tech environment, but nevertheless. And almost ubiquitously, the goals, the way the goals are described, and the deadlines are just all over the place. So someone who already has language processing issues tends to get lost. So these are essentially the bottom line is that the way the modern work environment is going, it's not a good fit for a lot of people on the spectrum. So the good news is that the higher functioning people on the spectrum tend to have a lot of strengths. They can have very intense focus on things that they're interested in, and this can be harnessed to good use. They manifest out-of-the-box thinking because, quite frankly, they don't know the box is there. And that can be helped. Honest to a fault, sometimes that causes problems, but at least you don't have to worry about them. Tend to be very logical, and basically they don't know what office politics is, so you don't have to worry about people playing games. And last but not least, they take great pride in the work, they want to work, they're very grateful that they have work. So they're ideal employees in many ways, and just about any employer should be happy to have them. So what do we do at the Specialist Guild? We try to bridge the gap between companies and people on the autism spectrum. Essentially, we are a nonprofit. We provide training and employment help for people on the spectrum, and we also work with companies to educate them why people on the spectrum can make ideal employees for them. Now, the approach we have is that we tend to identify areas that are relatively easily outsourceable and also fit with interests and abilities of particular individuals on the spectrum. So in the case of Matthew, maybe this would be gardening. But, you know, typically these are, so what I mean by outsourcing is this is work that requires little interaction with the rest of the company's employees and can be done pretty much added third site. And the nice thing about technology, and this is where technology comes in, is that with technologies that we have today, arranging to do this kind of work perhaps from the person's home or certainly at a more sheltered environment is significantly easier than it used to be. So once we identify an area, and the area, for instance, that we're working on right now is software testing, but similar areas could be medical data entry or bookkeeping, things that are of that nature. We either partner with another organization to provide training or ourselves train the individual, and then we enroll them in an apprenticeship program. And the purpose for the apprenticeship is to get the person experience on their resume. Because one of the biggest challenges in transitioning to the work force, and this is for neurotypicals as well, is that you have no track record, you have no experience. People on the spectrum are, they have yet another bridge to cross there. So we provide a way for people to get experienced under controlled conditions, if you will. The way we typically work is that the people on the spectrum, they have their assignments, they know what they are, they work on those assignments. So as an example, our current crop of trainees, they do software testing, they do all the software testing. And us neurotypicals, what we do is we interact with, we market our services, we interact with the customers, and we solve some of the problems. But it is certainly our vision and our intention to, during the apprenticeship period, to see if any of our people on the spectrum have skills and interest in getting into sales and marketing, areas like that, and develop those skills as well. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of timeline, we typically see a 16 to 20 week training period depending on the field. And I want to contrast this. This is not like going to a community college where part of what you do is general education. This is very intensely focused. The last set of trainees basically were in training 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. So we are talking about a condensed period of training and very focused on the skill set that we are interested in. Once the trainees are out of the training period, they get enrolled as apprentices. At this point, they get paid. They get paid minimum wage, San Francisco minimum wage, so it's a little better. And I'll mention later why that is. And then hopefully after a year or two, and having that on their resumes, they will be able to apply for marketplace jobs. So what are the challenges? Well, the biggest challenge is that we are competing with India because many of the jobs we can do are the ones that also tend to get offshore. So these are things like, you know, medical data entry might be an example of that. Good news is that a lot of those jobs are coming back because of dissatisfaction. But the revenues that we are able to command are similar to what they pay India, so it's not very high. So as a result, funding is always a challenge, and we don't expect to be able to run the organization purely on our revenues. We will need grants to operate. Business development is a huge challenge, getting companies to give us a chance, and I think they would be very, very pleasantly surprised once they do. And obviously, just that's also part of the employer education. The whole idea is that we want to get the employers comfortable with people on the spectrum, see how well they do, and as a result, encourage them to actually hire them as real employees. And there is a question of ongoing support once a person is in the open market position. Things can still go off the rails, misunderstandings still happen, so we need to sort of provide continuing support. So in summary, I think that there is a bit of a wake-up call coming for our society. There's a huge cohort of people on the spectrum coming up, and we need to figure out how to put these people into productive jobs. Otherwise, we're going to support them anyways. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is that breakthrough ideas often come from outside the herd. So people who are on the spectrum can be very valuable to an organization. I believe that this is as much of a human rights issue as an economic one, and probably is the next frontier for disability rights. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Andy. I have a question.
Sure.
You've described a model with apprenticeship. Does that mean that the skills these individuals are learning, I mean, that they are for skilled employment in the way we would normally think of skilled or semi-skilled? Skilled, certainly carpentry is a skill, and or does it take up to 24 months to do what in the vocational world might be called unskilled?
Yeah, we chose to use the word apprenticeship, and maybe that's causing some misunderstanding there. But basically, this is skilled work, and most of our individuals would be very competent after, like, let's say 6 months. No question about it. The problem is, if you take the software testing as an example, you can go and get trained in a community college setting. Let's say it takes you 18 months or 2 years to go through the course. You can't get a job. The first thing anybody asks is, where's your experience? They're looking for 2 years of experience. And this is for neurotypicals. This is not even people on the spectrum. So what the purpose of the apprenticeship program is to put people, not just continue training them, giving them extra skills, because we are talking about also skills to fit into the work environment, not just the actual technical skills. So there is additional training going on during that period. Also, these are engagements that they will have with real customers, and they are able to put on their resumes as I worked on this project for Cisco or Facebook or whatever the company might be. So it is our hope that after a year or two of that, they will have enough of a resume to actually go out there, get a job with any company, or even in some cases, if they are not so inclined because they find the working environment too intimidating, they can be freelancing. So that's why we tend to look for areas that are, easy to freelance in or outside.
So you're talking about skills in two different ways. I mean, one is the communication, social skills, which are often lacking in this population, but you're also talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, skills as in a plumber, in a in a cabinet maker, in a someone who does some kind of electrical
Exactly.
work. You mean skills in both senses
Exactly.
of the word.
I do. So these are the one thing that I didn't mention is that typically the people that we take on are not people who have a technical degree. So they do not, as in the case of the software testing example, everyone we trained had a college degree, but in something like history or some field that had nothing to do with computers or software testing. So we are talking about real technical skills as well, yes.
Okay, thank you.